10 years is a long time in podcasting years, and to continue podcasting for that long is a challenge in itself. But when you're dealing with a disability and other health issues, it takes that perseverance to another level. Wyn Charles has been hosting Wyn at Life for around 10 years. The podcast where she shares conversations about being awesome with a disability and raising awareness at the same time. She originally started the podcast as content marketing for her book, but it's grown into something much more. In this episode, we dive into Wyn's podcasting journey, which she's continued to grow despite the challenges that having a disability has brought. And we cover in this episode advice for podcasters dealing with a disability or other health issues, how Wyn has continued posting episodes for 10 years, the criteria Wyn uses for booking guests and why this has tightened over the years, how honesty and transparency have helped Wyn build an audience, the one thing Wyn wished she'd have done when she started podcasting that would have made the whole thing a lot easier, and much more. This conversation is packed with insights and inspiration from a podcaster who has faced significant challenges, and I'm confident that you'll find her story impactful. Hi Wyn, thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me on. I'm doing terrific.
Good stuff. So Wyn Charles, she hosts Wyn at Life. She's also a speaker, a journalist for disabled advocacy, and she offers podcast coaching as well. But her podcast, Wyn at Life, she shares conversations about being awesome with a disability and raising awareness at the same time. And yeah, it'd be great to hear how this all started, because you've been podcasting for a long time now, haven't you?
I've been podcasting for over 10 years, and how I started it is unfortunately, I saw my mom die, and she was my biggest champion. And that is public knowledge. I'm not coming on this podcast to say I saw my mom die. That's how this whole thing started. But I did start writing writing a book after she died, and then I realized, oh, you need to market the book. Hence, I learned how to write a book by listening to a podcast called The Creative Pen. And Joanna Penn is one of the top published authors independently in the UK. So at the time, she was doing a lot more independent marketing stuff than she does now. Her podcast has morphed over the years itself too. And so at the time, I was lucky enough to have her on my first episode, and I was lucky enough to be on her podcast as well.
Wow.
But I started all this because my mom died, and because my mom was my biggest champion, and saw what I needed, and then decided to love me as a medically complex child and do all the doctor's appointments with me and do everything. So when I started the podcast, I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book. I now need to market the book. Well, if I podcast by myself, it's going to be boring. And it's going to be boring and a piece of dry toast, and I'm going to put people to sleep, because cerebral palsy could be so mentally complex that people want to learn and people want to be educated, but at the same time, they want to be entertained. And so I feel like bringing other people in and bringing other people on is my best bet. But at the same time, I'm still trying to raise awareness about my injuries, my back, and about living awesome life with a disability. I live on my own right now temporarily. I have 24-hour care due to my back injury. And so um, I am hoping to get rid of said 24-hour care, not because I don't love them. I I just need my space and I just need my space to do my work. But so far so good. And it's not a build it, they will come thing. It's a more you build it, you have to promote it, and you have to market the podcast and be on other people's podcasts and be everywhere on which way I want to slow this going across the room have time because people are people do drive you nuts and you have to be prepared. And I've come to find out that people care about the host more than they care about who you're interviewing, unless you're interviewing the Prime Minister of the UK or in the US, it would be Michelle Obama or someone big like that. They don't care.
Mm.
They do not care who you're interviewing as long as you are on mic and you admit your fault and say I'm sorry when you screwed up and say, look, this is what I'm going through. This is how I'm dealing with it. And I know that unnecessary surgery will be required for my back, but we're dealing with that as it comes. And then I will take the time off to heal and let it reset itself. But for right now, I'm doing all that I can in the podcasting space. And for right now, I'm struggling, but yet still putting content out there. Not to say that I'm struggling all the time, but I'm a real person. I have those struggles. I also have anxiety and depression too, on top of cerebral palsy, which is always fun. All diagnosis finally got diagnosed. That's a long story why that I finally got diagnosed. But I want to be real. I want to be authentic. I don't want to be cut the interview short. I don't want to be non-authentic. I want to be authentic, and I want to be as authentic as I can. And some of my life is private, but some of my life is public, and yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I like what you said about people, they care a lot about the host, especially when you've been doing this for a long time. And yeah, I'm sure they would understand what what you're what you're sort of going through and how that could affect your content. But in spite of your disability and the issues with your back, you're still very prolific. You're putting a lot of content out there. I mean, I can see just 2 days ago you posted 2 episodes. How have you found it, staying consistent? Because you've been podcasting, like you say, for around 10 years. How have you been able to stay consistent and, keep putting episodes out there despite the
I
challenges you faced?
I I admit that I told my fan base originally I gave them updates on my back. I will continue to give them updates on my back. I told my fan base, look, I'm going to be in a hospital. I'm going to be in rehab. And if I didn't have an assistant, nothing would get done.
Mm.
Nothing. And I'm not kidding. Nothing would get done. My assistant handles all the scheduling. I just do the hosting. Now I'm doing the uploading, but without my assistant, the scheduling would not get done.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like good advice for any podcaster, having somebody who can do that for them, but
Yeah,
especially,
yeah,
if you're dealing with health issues. Is,
yeah.
yeah, is there anything else that you could advise other podcasters who might be listening who are going through health issues? They might have a disability themselves. Is there any advice that you can give them when it comes to just generally running a podcast?
Try to, if you have a huge health issue like I'm going through right now, try to tell them, uh, give them the steps that you're going through, and I will tell them what I'm going through, and I will give them the steps that I'm going through, even though they can't help. They may be, they can, even though they can't help in a general sense, they may have advice for you, or they may just want to be supportive behind the scenes. You never know. I mean, I got through a 5 hour back surgery with players across, with, I'm not kidding you, international players and players across the US, and people knew that I was having back surgery, and they knew that they still know that I'm healing, and they will probably figure out the next step. So my advice for people with disabilities who want to do a podcast or have a podcast, and the life keeps lifing, and keeps you away from your content, is to just tell your fan base, look, I need a break because I'm having a mental health breakdown, or I need a break because physically I'm having a back surgery, I'm having surgery of some sort that needs to be done to improve my quality of life.
Yeah, so just being honest, basically up front, and helping them to understand how they can help you
Yeah.
as well. Cool. And we were talking about guests, bringing on guests, and then also yourself as the host being that kind of person that the listeners know, like, and trust. How has that changed over your podcast in terms of your guests? What kind of guests have you brought on over the last 10 years? And has it changed the kind of guests you bring on?
Well, now I get very picky. Thank you to Podmatch.
Yeah.
Now I get very picky. Thank you to Podmatch, because for a while not. I was just interviewing everyone under the sun, but
Hmm.
now I consciously look at the profile and consciously see how many reviews they have, and how many um, things they have, and how many reviews, and how, and I, if I have time, I sometimes listen to some of the podcasts they've been on, or but I truly don't have time anymore to listen to what people have said on the podcast,
Yeah.
because I don't listen, and I will probably share this work out, your podcast out, but honestly, I don't listen to my own work, because it it really screws the perception of the way I'm doing as a podcaster, and I don't listen to other people's work. I want the conversation to be authentic, and it's taken me over 10 years to apologize. I had to apologize to two guests, and just recently, for putting the episodes backwards. And so I
Okay.
have to fix that. I put the episodes backwards and not even realizing it. but I will fix that and everything will be okay. And these guests still love me, they understand, but as long as you admit your fault,
Mm.
I will, you have to be authentic. It's not like you can't be authentic and you can't say the struggles behind the scenes. And if worse comes to worse and I need to go back into the hospital again, I will tell my fan base what's really up. I will tell everyone what's really up, and I have started planning my second back surgery in a couple months because I need to get this done for better quality of life.
Yeah, of course. And when you said you've become more picky with your guests, is that because of the podcast growing or because you've had bad experiences in the past?
It's because of the podcast growing, and it's not because I've had bad experiences in the past, but
Mm.
it's because of the podcast gone.
Okay. Yeah. You also mentioned that if they build it, they won't necessarily come, which is really something that a lot of podcasters feel, I'm sure. So how have you grown the podcast? I know you've got your book out and everything. What ways have you used to market the podcast and get more people listening?
Been on other people's podcasts, have my books out, do motivational speaking, do all. I'm everywhere on social media. I'm everywhere on the podcasting space. I mean, once you're in Apple, you're even though I absolutely hate Spotify. Spotify is a beast from the east, but I absolutely hate Spotify. But I have to be in there because of the European market, and I use several different podcasting apps myself to consume podcasts, but I don't like how Spotify is doing things now, and I'm trying to get out of it. Trying to get out of it, but I know the European market uses Spotify, so I'm sticking in Spotify. And right now, I'm working with a new podcasting company, and they have their books, and they're building out and using, I think, 10 people, including myself, to test the products. And it's like, really, people, do you really want to build this out? Um, I wish that it wasn't a brand new company. I wish that they had um, a little bit more space before they brought us all in. But it ends up being that they're working on it.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because Spotify obviously, like you say, it has a big market share, sort of 30-40% of listeners. What is it that has has turned you against Spotify then over the years?
Number one, you could put videos on Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
Videos? I'm like, no, videos are not podcast people. Um, and it's YouTube. YouTube is a great search engine, but who has time to sit and watch a YouTube video and then go subscribe to a podcast? I don't think so. I don't think so. If you want my grievances about podcasting, there they are. Because Spotify is trying to keep up with the Joneses instead, and Apple Podcasts, I'm sorry, not Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts is dead in the water.
Yeah.
So Spotify is taking over what Google Podcast And for those of you that don't know, that Google Podcast is now dead in the water. There's shocking news to you. Get your tell your listeners to get to stop listening on Apple on Google Podcast and go over to Apple Podcast and go over to the podcast app of their choice. But I don't think anyone could get in or out of Apple Podcast and in or out of Google Podcast. I keep saying Apple because it's what I use, but Google Podcast. I don't think Google Podcast will play anymore because it's not. They didn't do a good job marketing it or keeping it up. So it's dead in the water now, unfortunately. And I think um, I will say this: Apple's done a great job on integrating the podcast side, and the Android side is yet. I can't wait to see what gets integrated on the Android side, because if Google Podcast is dead in the water, what's next? Spotify being integrated on, and when I say integrated, it comes with every single operating system on the Android side, just like Apple Podcasts now comes um, on every iPhone, every iPad, every Apple Watch. I mean, it comes integrated already on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, so Google Podcasts they've shut that down, haven't they? And I reckon they're trying to replace it with YouTube Music, but then that's separate from the YouTube video, so it's a little bit confusing at the moment. But yeah, there are some benefits, like it is a better search engine. It's very difficult to find new podcasts on Spotify and iTunes still, Apple Podcasts. So there is that benefit, but it'd be
Yeah.
nice if it was a bit more sort of linked and consistent and easy to
Yes,
find
it would
what you
be.
want. Yeah. And then going back a little bit, just talking about your journey again, have there been any particular times, any challenges that you've had to push through from a podcasting perspective that maybe made you think I can't do the podcast anymore, or even not quite so as challenging as that, but just anything you've had to face that has made this seem a bit too difficult than it's worth?
Well, it's really funny because I knew that I had um, a mental illness, and yes, I do classify uh, anxiety and depression as a mental illness. I knew I had a mental illness going into this back surgery, the one that I recently had. And I'm like, well, I need to get out of the hospital. I need to get out of rehab, because when to diagnose, to figure out why I'm feeling this way, and turns out it was anxiety and depression. But when you say I feel like I have anxiety and depression in a hospital, they will keep you in longer. And I just want to get home. So
Mm.
I think this whole back surgery is teaching me a lot of valuable lessons about um, patience. And to swing it back to podcasting, you have to be patient. I'm not kidding. Patience I don't have, patience I'm learning. And people will say that I do have patience. You're right. I may look like I have patience on the outside, but on the inside, I want to know the answers now. I want to figure out the answers now. But again, you have to have patience. The one download is the one download, and soon the one download will turn into 10, will turn into 11, will turn into 12, will turn into 100, will turn into 1,000.
Yeah. Patience. Yeah, I mean, that's why we ask before we work with a podcaster, we ask them how long are you expecting it will take, or how much time are you willing to invest before you get any kind of traction or return. And if it's sort of under a year, or ideally it will be at least 2 years, then we need to have a word with them and say, if you want to do this and make this podcast happen, you need to have at least that sort of 2 year outlook, I think.
Yeah, 2 years, I would say great. And I wouldn't say that's great advice, but the podcasting space is changing 1,000 miles a minute.
Yeah.
So is the book space, so is every space in demand.
Yeah, it's changing fast. There is a lot more video going on. There's also just about every niche you can think of now that's been, there's a podcast under it. So I think, having that personal story and focusing on your story and what you can offer as an individual is what's going to help you to stand out these days.
Yep.
Cool. Well, if I could just ask one more question before we wrap things up. If there was one thing that you wish you'd known from the beginning when you started around 10 years ago that would have made things easier for you for the podcast, what would it be?
About artificial intelligence,
Oh,
I
yeah.
wish I would have known a little bit more about artificial intelligence, and I wish that someone would have guided me through the podcast space before I even started. I mean, I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing when I started in 2010. And so I wish that the podcast space would accept me, would have accepted me way back when little old me dived into this big monster called podcasting, and little old me didn't know anything. Now I've gained several heaps of knowledge, and I'm trying to pass it on. So get someone to guide you through before you completely commit to a podcast and admit your faults, because there will be, I'm sure, beyond belief along the way, and there will be what's next. I mean, my phone doesn't stop ringing if I don't let it. And between my personal life and my work life, and right now life keeps lifing. Thank you, back surgery. But between my work life and my personal life, my phone goes off constantly, and I have to tell people I'm going to mute this WhatsApp group because I need my personal space, and I will need my personal space if they want to do my back again, and I will need to take more time off than I was planning. And yeah.
Yeah, so it's brought a lot of opportunities for you, the podcast in general.
Yeah. The podcast in general has brought amazing opportunities.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing your story. That's been inspiring. I think there's a lot of useful insight there for people who are starting a podcast, especially in the early days where they're struggling with slow traction. But yeah, I think people are going to find that really helpful.
Oh yeah.
And
again, it's
yeah,
not a build it, they will come situation, you guys.
yeah,
You have to be patient. You have to apologize along the way.
yeah, being authentic and yeah, it sounds like guesting and things have been really helpful for growing your podcast. Cool. Well, you can find Win at Life, conversations about disability, awesomeness and awareness. You can find that on any podcast platform, including Spotify at the moment, if you're using Spotify. And then you can also find Win's book, I Win: My Journey with Cerebral Palsy in a Non-Disabled World. You can find that on Amazon, and I'm guessing most bookstores. Would that be accurate? Or
No, only on Amazon,
just Amazon at the
because
moment? Okay, I'll edit that and add a link.
just Amazon, because Amazon, and that's why I'm going to publisher with my next book, because Amazon has trouble selling in bookstores, guys. So don't self-publish book. Self-publishing is the easy way out, guys. And I've learned that one the hard way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, we'll add the Amazon link into the show notes. But thank you again. Thank you for sharing your time with me, because I know you're busy and you've got the issues with your back at the moment. So I appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.